I began researching the issue of gang stalking after noticing reoccurring patterns in my own life. Over time, I experienced significant disruptions that seemed unexplainable, which led me to further investigate. My naturally inquisitive nature drove me to explore how gang stalking operates and its broader implications. I hesitated to speak about it earlier because a part of me struggled to accept that I might be targeted. However, I now realize the importance of addressing this issue, not only for my own safety, but also to raise awareness. Others going through similar issues shouldn't feel isolated, and more academic and criminological research is needed, as this issue remains largely underreported and understudied. What is gang stalking? It's a distinctive form of criminal activity characterized by repeated following and harassing of another person for the purpose of destroying that person's life. It's a form of psychological warfare, others would call it a psyop, often described as an organized and covert campaign designed to intimidate, isolate, and psychologically destabilize a targeted individual, otherwise known as TI. It employs tactics intended to instill fear and intimidation and drive the victim into a state of survival mode, emotional distress, and self-harm. In a video on YouTube, Stephanie the Seeker summarizes it as an orchestrated attempt to confuse, discredit, disable, and dim your light. In essence, gang stalking is a form of domestic terrorism that systemically erodes the victim's sense of self, security, and well-being. Dr. Eric Karlstrom of California State University describes it as follows. Organized gang stalking is experienced by the targeted individual as a psychological attack that is capable of immobilizing and destroying them over time. The express goal is to silence a victim, drive a victim insane and possibly to the point of suicide, or destroy the victim's reputation and credibility, as the person will likely be viewed as mentally ill should they complain or report the abuse. Who are targeted individuals? Targeted individuals are people who experience ongoing systemic surveillance and harassment, often with no clear explanation as to why they have been chosen. Many report feeling like they are under constant observation, subjected to carefully orchestrated disruptions, and manipulated through psychological tactics that gradually undermine their stability and credibility. In a video by Professor Sam Vaknin, he outlines the different types of gang stalking. Number 1, there's a structural conspiracy. This includes government, law enforcement, agencies, corporations, and oftentimes used for research and experimentation purposes. 2, a loose network, self-proclaimed vigilantes, an extension of narcissism, flying monkeys. Formalized, this includes fraternities, cults, excommunicated individuals from churches, etc. Number 4, people likely to be mentally ill, sociopathic, psychopathic, and narcissistic personalities operating under delusion of a perceived wrong from the TI. For more information, please refer to his video labeled Gang Stalking is Real, Should Be Studied Conference Keynote Speech on YouTube. Next, we'll be talking about the methods of psychological and physical harassment. Gang stalkers employ a range of strategies designed to confuse, exhaust, and emotionally destabilize victims. Some of these include sleep disturbances, noise campaigns, which include loud banging, construction sounds, excessive barking, etc. Smear campaigns, false accusations, defamation, all aimed at attempting to destroy and assassinate the person's character. The baiting for reactive abuse, where you provoke reactions to frame the victim as unstable, manipulating the victim into retaliating, then using it against them. There's direct energy weapons, DWs, which could include the use of radio frequencies and sound technology. There's electronic harassment, including phone tapping, cyberstalking, computer hacking. There's neural monitoring. This is voice-to-skull technology, and this was actually used against Diana Napolis, who is a former social worker who was exposing ritual abuse, and she became targeted with remote neural monitoring, which is voice-to-skull technology, V2K. Then there's mimicry. This is an imitation of the TI's behaviors to instill paranoia, like laughing when they laugh or going to the bathroom a certain time when they do. Then there's street theater, where there's stage scenarios meant to gaslight the victim, which oftentimes include personal information only the TI would know. Then there's stalking and surveillance, and also, lastly, anchoring, which is a use of repetitive symbols, gestures, phrases, colors, or songs to create triggers for the individual. From my research and my own personal experiences, while there's no definitive and uniform answer that exists, common reasons reported among TIs include having a unique light, purpose, and gift, being called for something great, and we know from a spiritual perspective that the enemy would want to prevent that at all costs. You could also just be someone with a good heart posture. You could be a truth seeker, speaker, an outspoken individual, having significant potential for influence or are influential, refusing initiation into secretive organizations or fraternities, a person who criminals are unable to use and manipulate for their own agendas, and it could also be jealousy and envy of the targeted individual. This category would include ex-partners and relatives who seek to make your life hell from leaving a narcissistic relationship. Now I will be discussing the goals and objectives of gang stalkers. The overarching aim of gang stalkers is to break the victim down psychologically, socially, and financially, causing damage privately and then the victim self-destruct publicly. This is achieved by driving the victim towards self-destruction or suicide, creating the perception that the victim is mentally unstable and thereby discrediting any claims they make, keeping the victim in a perpetual state of survival mode, preventing them from fulfilling their potential, exploiting the victim's circumstances for ulterior motives, using confusion as a weapon, and for those, again, with a spiritual understanding, we know that Satan is the author of confusion. There are also links between gang stalking methodologies and MKUltra, the CIA's mind control program, which sought to override free will through trauma-based programming, sleep deprivation, and forced psychological conditioning. The 1950s film The Sleep Room illustrates some of these methods, which include breaking down individuals' mental states to induce suggestibility. The concept of alters in MKUltra, thought to be tied to demonic possession, warrants further investigation in the context of gang stalking. Here are some common assumptions and arguments often used to discredit TIs. They are schizophrenic and psychotic. According to the National Health Services, the symptoms of schizophrenia are hallucinations, delusions, confused thinking and speech, disconnected from feelings and emotions, and in general, it is described as a form of psychosis. If this were true for every targeted individual's experiences of gang stalking, how are there well-educated and stable individuals who are in fields requiring a high degree of competence like mental health and social work, and who have no history of mental health issues, reporting on experiencing the same things in different places of the world? Furthermore, if targeted individuals were truly delusional or hallucinating, how do we explain the well-documented audio and visual evidence that supports their claims? Additionally, why do so many TIs report strikingly similar experiences? These commonalities suggest a level of objectivity, challenging the idea that their experiences are purely subjective. The next argument is that it sounds fantastical, insane, because who would go to those lengths just to harm someone? Unfortunately, there have been well-documented and declassified documents highlighting the insane measures governments, researchers, and other organizations have taken throughout history to achieve coercive control and general compliance. So in reality, it's not a reach. Take, for instance, Project MKUltra, which was a research intended to develop methods to manipulate mental states. And lastly, it's important to acknowledge that even if some targeted individuals have experienced mental health challenges prior to reporting their experiences, who is to say that two things can't be true at once? As Jordan Peterson puts it in 12 Rules for Life, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. Furthermore, the exact causes of schizophrenia remain unknown. And in my opinion, individuals who have endured extreme trauma, such as gang stalking and gaslighting from their experience, may be more likely to develop severe mental health symptoms that resemble schizophrenia. As for the current literature and research, for its data set, there was a study that accounted for 50 descriptions of gang stalking from individuals on the internet. One study from the National Library of Medicine analyzing the psychological impact of gang stalking found that individuals who reported being group stalked exhibited significantly higher levels of depressive symptoms, PTSD, and disruptions in social and occupational functioning compared to those experiencing individual stalking. This aligns with the overarching observation that gang stalking aims to destabilize individuals to the point where they become incapable of functioning in normal society. For people who prefer more of an audio-visual breakdown of the concept of gang stalking, I believe movies are a great tool to learn since they often have hidden messages that expose the truth. Here's a list that I can recommend from what I've watched so far. There is The Manchurian Candidate, A Cure for Wellness, The Sleep Room, The Killing Room, Unsane, and Get Out. One of the main reasons gang stalking is difficult to expose is the lack of academic research on the issue. As a result, victims are often dismissed as paranoid or delusional, leading many to suffer in silence. This makes gathering evidence and educating the public crucial. I believe the most effective way to study gang stalking is through an intersectional approach, particularly a psycho-spiritual lens. I have noticed overlapping patterns between gang stalking tactics and those seen in ritual abuse, MKUltra experiments, and narcissistic abuse. Others have suggested that covert operations like gang stalking are known to law enforcement and government agencies, but are deliberately covered up to function as silent killers. However, with greater awareness, this can change, especially as these activities are becoming less covert. I also believe that those who participate in organized gang stalking are often driven by malevolent influences, whether psychological, such as psychopathy and narcissism, or in some cases, spiritual or demonic forces. Abuse thrives in isolation. The goal of these gang stalkers is to make the victim suffer in silence and self-destruct publicly. The psychological manipulation is carefully crafted to discredit the victim and make them appear unstable. However, if you are experiencing this, know that you are not alone. So what can be done? Document everything. However, I would caution going down deep rabbit holes, as confusion is part of the psychological manipulation and to keep you stuck. Seek support, but practice discernment in whom you trust. Consider therapy to maintain emotional resilience and clarity. Invest in personal security, your home security, cyber protection, etc. Stay calm and rational, as fear clouds judgment and plays into their tactics. Avoid substances as coping mechanisms, like drugs and alcohol, as these can be weaponized against you. Engage in activities that promote mental clarity and well-being. And finally, report evidence wherever possible and necessary. By shedding light on gang stalking and encouraging open dialogue, we can help expose these tactics, support victims, and work towards dismantling and deconstructing the structures that enable this form of cruel, psychological, and domestic terrorism.